Hi, it's Nicole. Today we are looking at the novel The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot, published in 1860. When I first heard about this book, The Mill on the Floss, I thought, what does that mean? What does the mill on the floss mean? After I've not read it, I know that the title actually gives a clue to the story. So it's about a family who are millers, and their mill is on River Floss. So the mill is where flour is made from grain, and Floss is the name of the river, so River Floss. So I'm going to tell you, as usual, what the story is about, and then we'll look at the opening scene, one of the opening scenes where we first meet Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver and Maggie. So these are some of the main characters. We'll look at how George Eliot was such a master in character building. The story is set in Lincolnshire in England in the 1820s and 30s. So our main character is Maggie, and it's about her family. So her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver, and her brother Tom, who was 3 years older than her. So the story starts in Tom and Maggie's childhood. So as I just said, Maggie was 9 and Tom was 12, and Tom just came home from school for a summer holiday. In the opening conversation, we learn exactly what kind of people Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver were, what kind of personality they had, and what kind of worldview they had, and who was their favorite child. A lot of things about them all in a very short space of time. And we get to know a small supporting cast, Mrs. Tulliver's 3 sisters and their husbands, and one of the sister's child, cousin Lucy, who was completely opposite to Maggie. And we get to know Tom and Maggie. So they spend a glorious summer holiday together, fishing, sharing cakes, sharing pudding, and arguing and making up again. And it's just a beautiful picture of childhood. I like this part of the book the best, I'd say. That's why we're looking at one of the opening scenes a bit later on. So after the summer holiday, Tom was sent to a private tutor, a new school place, to learn Latin grammar and all that kind of thing, and met a school fellow called Philip Wickham. And there were only 2 of them with that tutor, but they didn't become good friends because, first of all, they had really different temperaments. So Philip was a quiet child because he had a physical deformity, and Tom was just an average 12-year-old boy, very active, fishing, playing with swords, running about, catching rabbits, all that kind of thing. So they didn't get on well because they liked doing different things. But I think more importantly is because their fathers had gone to law against each other, so they were having a lawsuit against each other. So Tom thought Philip was a rascal's son and they were enemies, so they didn't become good friends. When Maggie visited Tom at this tutor's place, she met Philip and they became good friends. Because even though Philip was quiet, he was knowledgeable and he read a lot, so he knew a lot of good stories from history and Greek classics. So they became good friends, just telling each other stories. But also when Tom was injured in an accident, Philip was kind and sat with him while Tom couldn't go out catching rabbits anymore. He sat with him and told him stories just to keep him company. So Maggie was very thankful for Philip being kind to her brother. But that didn't last very long because soon they heard that the lawsuit was lost. So Mr. Tulliver lost the lawsuit against Philip Wickham's father, and he lost all his property, all his land, his mill, his livelihood. And as a result, he had a stroke and fell off his horse and was carried home half dead. So age 15, Tom had to stop his schooling and start to work and support his family. And Maggie stayed at home to look after her sick father and a very sad mother, and to look after the household, and this depressing little home, this little family became her whole world. The downfall of their father because of Wickham meant that Philip and Maggie couldn't be friends, but their friendship rekindled in secret. At this point of the story, I thought this is going to become a Victorian Romeo and Juliet, but not quite, because very soon after that, another young man was introduced called Stephen Guest. Stephen Guest was introduced as cousin Lucy's fiance. So this was a few years later. They've all grown up. They've all now in their late teens. They were still very young, but they were maybe 18 or 19 now. And Stephen Guest very quickly fell in love with Maggie, and Maggie loved him in return. And here comes the ending. I'm not going to spoil it for you. It's worth reading and expect some drama. Right, I'm going to read one section in chapter 2 of the novel and we'll see some fabulous character building. I really love this section and I really love Maggie. See if by the end of it you don't like her as well. This is where we first meet Maggie, and before the passage I'm going to read, Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver are in their living room discussing about Tom's education. They want to send Tom to a better school and get a better education. I'm going to read it and do a bit of a running commentary. So this is Mr. Tulliver speaking. Well, I'm a bit afraid on it, as Tom hasn't got the right sort of brain for a smart fellow. I doubt he's a bit slowish. He takes after your family, Bessie. Yes, that he does, said Mrs. Tulliver, accepting the last proposition entirely on its own merit. He's wonderful for liking a deal of salt in his broth. That was my brother's way and my father's before him. So takes after your family obviously means Tom is like her and her family, the Dodsons. She didn't seem to sense the insult at all. She's so proud and pleased that her son is like her. Even though the characteristics of being like a Dodson hasn't got a smart brain and a bit slow. And the proof of being a true Dodson is that he likes a lot of salt in his broth. So we learn from this conversation that Tom is a bit slow and he takes after his mother. Let's carry on. It seems a bit of a pity though, said Mr. Tulliver, as the lad should take after the mother's side instead of the little wench. The little wench referred to his daughter Maggie, so wench means young woman. That's the worst of with the crossing of breeds. You can never justly calculate will come on it. So that calculate, the spelling of that calculate shows that Mr. Tulliver didn't have much education, so it spells wrong as how Mr. Tulliver would have spelt it. Earlier on, he said he didn't have much education or schooling. He says, all the learning my father ever paid for was a bit of birch at one end and the alphabet at the other. The little urn takes after my side. Little urn is like little girl, refers to Maggie again. The little urn takes after my side now. She's twice as cute as Tom. Too cute for a woman, I'm afraid. Cute is acute. Oxford English Dictionary says it means intelligent and quick to notice and understand things. So it means Maggie is very quick and clever. So too cute for a woman, I'm afraid, continued Mr. Tulliver, turning his head dubiously first on one side and then on the other. It's no mischief much while she's little urn, but an over-cute woman's no better nor a long-tailed sheep. She will fetch none the bigger price for that. He's clearly proud of her cleverness, but he is unsure if this is a good thing or not for her future. So we saw Mr. Tulliver's opinion and concern. Being mischievous, being too quick, it's not a problem, it's not a trouble while she's a little girl. But Mrs. Tulliver thinks it is a trouble indeed. She says, yes, it is a mischief while she's little, Mr. Tulliver, for you all runs to naughtiness. How to keep her in a clean pinafore 2 hours together passes my cunning. And now you put me in mind, continued Mrs. Tulliver, rising and going to the window. I don't know where she is now, and it's pretty nigh tea time. Ah, I thought so, wandering up and down by the river like a wild thing. She'll tumble in some day. Mrs. Tulliver rapped the window sharply, beckoned and shook her head, a process which she repeated more than once before she returned to her chair. So we see Mrs. Tulliver's concern that Maggie is too naughty, a bit wild, and not obedient, and take her words seriously because she told her not to walk up and down the river, she might fall in, and Maggie will do that because why not? And so Mrs. Tulliver rapped on the window a few times to get Maggie's attention to call her inside the house. So we learned one thing so far, that Maggie is very quick, and now Mrs. Tulliver is going to tell us something else about her. She sat down on the chair and continued, you talk of cuteness, Mr. Tulliver, she observed as she sat down, but I'm sure the child's half an idiot in some things, for if I send her upstairs to fetch something, she forgets what she's gone for. And perhaps she'll sit down on the floor in the sunshine and plait her hair and sing to herself like a bedlam creature, all the while I'm waiting for her downstairs. So Mrs. Tulliver thinks her daughter sometimes half an idiot and like a bedlam creature. Bedlam refers to Bethlehem Hospital, which at the time was a madhouse. It was a lunacy asylum. It still exists. It's in London. It's a psychiatric hospital now. The word Bedlam and this concept of Bedlam appears in a lot of classic novels, and it's almost an equivalent to madhouse and madness. So here, when we read this, Maggie forgets what she's gone for and sit down on the floor in the sunshine, plait her hair and sing to herself. We think, well, I think at least she's just a bit dreamy as a child. But Mrs. Tulliver thinks her own daughter is a bit mad. She behaves unusual. So let's carry on. That never runs in my family, thank God. No more, nor a brown skin as makes her look like a mulatta. I don't like to fly in the face of Providence, but it seems hard as I should have but one girl and her so comical. So Mrs. Tulliver describes her own daughter as a mulatta. Mulatta is a offensive way of referring to someone who has one black parent and one white parent. I was going to give Mrs. Tulliver the benefit of the doubt that maybe in 19th century that word was not offensive yet, but according to Wikipedia it was offensive even in the 19th century. So we can only come to the conclusion that George Eliot, I assume George Eliot would know that this word was offensive and not polite, but she gave this word to Mrs. Tulliver. Either to show that Mrs. Tulliver's world was so small, everybody else has stopped using this word because it's not polite, it's rude. She hadn't realized, or she hadn't heard about it, or she's just very insensitive, even though she knew this is probably rude. She still uses that word. So that one word gives us a picture of what Mrs. Tulliver is like. In response to Mrs. Tulliver, "Pooh, nonsense," said Mr. Tulliver. "She's a straight, black-eyed wench as anybody need wish to see. I don't know in what she's behind other folks' children, and she can read almost as well as the parson." That says something about the parson. Mrs. Tulliver is not satisfied with Maggie, either her behaviours or her look. Mrs. Tulliver prefers Tom. But Mr. Tulliver sees nothing wrong with Maggie, even when compared to other people's children. Mr. Tulliver clearly is very proud of the fact that Maggie is clever and she can read almost as well as the parson. But wait you see Mrs. Tulliver's reply. "But her hair won't curl, all I can do with it. And she's so frenzy about having it put in paper, and have such work as never was to make her stand and have it pinched with the irons." Cut it off short," said her father rashly. "How can you talk so, Mr. Tulliver? She's too big a girl, gone 9 and tall of her age, to have her hair cut short. And there's her cousin Lucy's got a roll of curls around her head, and not a hair out of place. It seems hard as my sister Dean should have that pretty child. I'm sure Lucy takes more after me nor my own child does." "Maggie, Maggie," continued the mother, in a tone of half-coaxing fretfulness, as this small mistake of nature entered the room. "Where's the use of my telling you to keep away from the water? You'll tumble in and be drowned some day, and then you'll be sorry you didn't do as mother told you." All she cared about was Maggie's curls. And I really love that little phrase saying, "as this small mistake of nature entered the room." I just felt that really adorable, really cute sentence. And now Maggie appears on the stage for the first time. This is the first time we meet Maggie in person with our own eyes. I'm not going to do any more commentary because I really love this passage. I'll just read on. Maggie's hair, as she threw off her bonnet, painfully confirmed her mother's accusation. Mrs. Tulliver, desiring her daughter to have a curled crop, like other folks' children, had had it cut too short in front to be pushed behind the ears. And as it was usually straight an hour after it had been taken out of paper, Maggie was incessantly tossing her head to keep the dark, heavy locks out of her gleaming black eyes, an action which gave her very much the air of a small Shetland pony. Oh dear, Maggie, what are you thinking of to throw your bonnet down there? Take it upstairs, there's a good girl, and let your hair be brushed, and put your other pinafore on, and change your shoes. Do, for shame. And come and go on with your patchwork, like a little lady." "Oh, mother," said Maggie in a vehement cross tone. "I don't want to do my patchwork." "What? Not your pretty patchwork, to make a counterpane for your Aunt Glegg?" "It's foolish work," said Maggie with a toss of her mane, "tearing things to pieces to sew them together again. And I don't want to do anything for my Aunt Glegg. I don't like her." Exit Maggie, dragging her bonnet by the string, while Mr. Tulliver laughs audibly. "I wonder at you as you laugh at her, Mr. Tulliver," said the mother, with feeble fretfulness in her tone. "You encourage her in naughtiness, and her aunt will have it as it's me spoils her." I can really see little Maggie and her parents in that small snapshot of their everyday life. It's fabulous, just how her parents are like and how she is like and their interaction. I just love that little paragraph. And I feel like Maggie is a bit like Anne Shirley. Do you think? Anne of Green Gables? Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables. She's just as fanciful and easily distracted as we've seen. Mrs. Tulliver thinks she's like a bedlam creature. She's just a bit easily distracted, and she has this whole world in her head, and she imagines, and she just get absorbed into her own world and forget what's outside. And also the fact that she doesn't like doing patchwork, that reminds me of Anne Shirley as well. I remember clearly Anne Shirley said there's not much scope for imagination or something like that in sewing squares of fabrics together. And Anne Shirley thinks it's boring work. There's no imagination in it. And Maggie thinks it's a waste of time. It's foolish, tearing fabrics to pieces and sew them together again. I really like that. And Maggie really has strong feelings towards people. She's really outspoken about it as well, not very diplomatic. She said, "I don't like Aunt Glegg. I don't want to make her counterpane a bedspread for her." And you can tell Mr. Tulliver is an indulgent father. We found out later on a bit more. He always takes her part when everybody's criticized her, when everybody finds faults with her, because her mother keeps comparing her with other children, especially compare her with Lucy. All of her sisters, as in Maggie's aunts, keeps criticizing her about her hair, about her skin, about how she looks. They're just never happy with her. And to conclude, if you want to try George Eliot and is a bit intimidated by Middlemarch, maybe you can give The Mill on the Floss a try. It's a really lovely story, and in comparison it's definitely shorter and it has a smaller cast. It has a more straightforward storyline. We follow one protagonist, Maggie, and we follow her throughout her life. It's a bit of a coming of age story. And also the two protagonists, Maggie Tulliver in The Mill on the Floss and Dorothea Brooke in Middlemarch, they really remind me of each other. They are very similar. For one thing, for example, the author gave them this same characteristics, that they are both very beautiful, but their beauty is set off best in plain clothes, which is very specific, but it happened to both of them. And they are both, more importantly, very intelligent, and they have this hunger to learn, to read, to acquire knowledge, but they are not encouraged and they are not satisfied or fulfilled in that way. And both heroines at the beginning of the story had a relationship with a knowledgeable man, but weaker physically. For example, in The Mill on the Floss, Philip Wickham had a deformity, and in Middlemarch, Casaubon was a very old man. I can't remember how old he was, but I feel like he was like a grandpa to Dorothea. Probably not that much, but he was definitely weaker physically. And later on, both heroines had another relationship with a younger man. So that's The Mill on the Floss. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.